What would you do if you found out the person you trusted most had been lying to you all along? Samantha's heart stopped as she read the message on her husband's phone. Can't wait to see you again. Love, E.E. Emily, her sister. The betrayal was gut-wrenching. How could the man she loved, the woman she called her sister, tear her world apart like this? Everything she thought she knew, shattered. Now, the question is, how far would she go to expose the truth? Hit that like button if you've ever been betrayed, and subscribe for more shocking stories like this. The air in the Johnson household was thick with routine. There were no great dramas, no explosive moments. In fact, this was the kind of life that seemed to exist on a predictable, steady stream, a rhythm that was comforting and warm. Samantha Johnson, in her early 60s, had lived this life for nearly 40 years. Her husband, David, was the man she had once believed was her perfect match. They had built a life together, from the young years of their marriage to raising two children, now adults, both successful in their own right. Samantha had never known anything but loyalty and consistency from David. Or so she thought. They lived in a quiet suburban home, nestled in a cul-de-sac surrounded by trees that whispered in the wind, and where neighborhood dogs barked every now and then, greeting the early mornings. Samantha was content in her world. As much as she'd sacrificed over the years, family events, friendships, hobbies, she never minded. She was committed to her family, and David had always been there as the reliable husband and father. But lately, something had shifted. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. David had started coming home late from work, a little more often than usual. At first, she brushed it off as work stress or long meetings. But when he stopped answering her calls on the way home, or when he started taking his phone into the bathroom for extended periods, she began to feel the first prickle of doubt. At first, Samantha told herself it was nothing. He had always been the quiet, introverted type, someone who appreciated his privacy. They had developed this pattern over the years, where they each had their own space, their own time. But she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there was more to it. One evening, as she set the dinner table, waiting for David to return home, she noticed something unusual: his phone. It sat on the kitchen counter, face up, as it had been since he'd left for work. She hadn't thought much of it before, as David rarely left his phone unattended. But tonight, she noticed a message flash across the screen. "See you tonight. Same time." It wasn't the words themselves, but the name that made her stomach twist. Emily, her sister. Samantha's heart stopped. She shook her head, convincing herself it was just a work message, a colleague, or a mistake. But the thought lingered. Later that night, she stood in the dim light of the kitchen, watching the refrigerator hum quietly in the background. David hadn't yet returned, and the silence in the house felt oppressive. Samantha's thoughts circled back to the message. It was odd, wasn't it? Why would Emily be sending such a message? And why didn't David tell her about it? Surely he would have mentioned it casually, right? The door creaked open, and David stepped inside, his familiar face lighting up at the sight of her. She forced a smile, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the words on the screen. "Hey, Sam," David greeted her, his voice warm, but his gaze distant. "You're looking lovely tonight." Samantha's hand hovered over the dinner plates, but her thoughts were elsewhere. "Who was Emily texting you earlier?" she asked, trying to sound casual, though the weight of the question pulled at her throat. David's face froze for a second. It was so brief that Samantha almost wondered if it had been her imagination. He quickly recovered, a sheepish smile stretching across his face. "Emily? Oh, just some work stuff. You know how she is. Always asking me to help with something." His laugh was forced, a little too high-pitched. Samantha nodded slowly, though a knot tightened in her chest. Hmm. She never mentioned anything to me. She tried to keep her tone light, but the words felt heavy on her tongue. David met her eyes for a moment, then dropped his gaze. She probably forgot. You know how she gets, Sam. His voice trailed off, and he turned toward the living room. Samantha didn't push it any further. She had been with David long enough to know when to let things slide, when to let the lie sit comfortably between them. But as they sat down for dinner, the usual warmth of their shared meals felt colder, as if the air had thickened, become more difficult to breathe. That night, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. David's breathing beside her was steady, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The unease grew, subtle, insidious, but there nonetheless. It was the kind of thing you couldn't quite explain, but could feel deep in your bones. She had no way of knowing that the betrayal she suspected wasn't just a passing worry, but a reality that would soon force its way into the light. The next morning, as Samantha made her coffee, she reached for David's coat that hung on the back of the door. She had been meaning to put it away, but there was something about the way it hung there, like a lingering shadow in the room. She couldn't resist the impulse. Her hand brushed against the inside pocket, and there it was. A crumpled piece of paper, almost like a receipt. She pulled it out, unfolding it carefully. It was a small note, written hastily in Emily's handwriting. "I'll be there soon. Can't wait to see you again. Love, E." The words were simple, yet they hit her like a slap to the face. Her heart hammered in her chest. Samantha's vision blurred as she read and reread the note. There was no denying it now. There was something happening between David and Emily, something she hadn't been able to see before, something that had been happening right under her nose. Her world, which had seemed so solid just a week ago, now felt like it was slowly unraveling. She put the note back in the pocket and walked out of the room, her mind racing. This was no longer just a feeling in her gut. It was undeniable. She had been betrayed. And now, the question was, what was she going to do about it? The small, subtle signs were no longer a puzzle. The truth was staring her in the face. And Samantha knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The day felt heavy, the air thick with unspoken tension. Samantha spent most of it in a haze, unable to focus on anything except the note she had found. Her world was still reeling, and each step she took felt as if she were walking through a fog. The weight of what she had discovered pressed on her chest, and every time she looked at David, the familiar comfort she once felt seemed to evaporate, leaving behind only emptiness. She tried to go about her usual routine, but nothing felt right. The house, once a safe haven, felt foreign, like she was inhabiting someone else's life. At breakfast, David seemed as unaware of the storm brewing inside her as ever. He sipped his coffee, scanning through the newspaper, as if everything were perfectly normal. His calm demeanor only made the sense of betrayal in Samantha's heart feel even more like a cruel joke. Around midday, Samantha received a call from her daughter, Claire. Their conversation was light, full of mundane pleasantries, but as soon as she heard Claire's voice, an idea began to form in her mind. Perhaps she wasn't the one who needed to confront David. Perhaps it was time for someone else to bring the truth into the light. Claire had always been close to her mother. She had inherited Samantha's strong sense of justice, and while she might not have known the full extent of what had been happening, she knew enough about her mother's pain to understand something was terribly wrong. Samantha could almost hear the concern in Claire's voice through the phone, a reflection of what she herself was feeling deep down. Claire was the one who could do it, the one who could expose David's betrayal, the one who could confront him without the hesitation and doubt that was tying Samantha's hands. It wasn't easy for Samantha to ask her daughter for help, but the truth was, She couldn't keep living in this limbo. She couldn't pretend anymore. Not when her own sister had been involved in this cruel game. "Mom, are you okay?" Claire's voice broke through her thoughts, and Samantha blinked, realizing she had been silent for too long. "I need you to come over," Samantha said, her voice shaky but steady. I need your help. There's something you need to know." Claire didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in an hour." The next hour crawled by, each tick of the clock pushing her closer to an inevitable confrontation. Samantha stood in the living room, her hands shaking as she poured another cup of coffee, the bitter scent doing little to ground her. She felt so small, so powerless. Yet at the same time, she knew she had to take control. This was her life, her marriage, and it had been shattered by the two people she trusted most. When the doorbell rang, Samantha's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't realized just how anxious she was until that moment. Claire entered, looking as though she had been rushing, her face full of concern. "Mom, what's going on?" she asked, taking a seat on the couch and eyeing her mother carefully. Samantha took a deep breath, steadying herself. "David and Emily, I found something today." She paused, the words too heavy to come out all at once. She reached into her bag, pulling out the crumpled note she had found earlier, and handed it to Claire. Claire unfolded the paper slowly, her eyes scanning the words. As she read, her face tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line. What is this?" Claire asked quietly, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Are you saying, Mom, is this what I think it is?" Samantha nodded. "Yes. I don't know how long it's been going on, but it's real. There's something between them, Claire. Something more than just friendship. And I can't just sit here pretending I don't know. I need to confront them. I need the truth to come out." Claire's expression hardened. She had always admired her mother's strength, but seeing her like this, on the verge of breaking, was something she hadn't prepared for. Samantha had always been the one who held everything together, never showing vulnerability. But now, Claire saw her for what she was, a woman who had been betrayed by the people she loved most. "Mom," Claire said softly, but with resolve, "you don't have to do this alone. I'll help you." Samantha took a deep breath, and for the first time in days, a sense of clarity settled over her. It wasn't just about exposing David. It was about exposing Emily, too, the sister who had been a part of their family for years, who had played the role of the loving aunt to Samantha's children, and who now, she realized, had been playing a much darker game. "I can't let this go on," Samantha said, her voice growing steadier. "But I can't confront him alone, Claire. I need you to be there when I do." Claire nodded, her expression serious. "I'll be there. We'll do this together." Later that evening, when David walked in, his casual greeting seemed almost mocking in the light of what had been discovered. Samantha stood by the door, Claire beside her, both of them watching him with a quiet intensity. David's eyes darted between them, sensing that something was different, but he didn't yet know how deep the storm was about to hit. "Hey," he said, setting his briefcase down. "What's going on? You both look serious." Samantha could feel the tremor in her chest, the tension of the moment building, but she held her ground. She wasn't going to cower anymore. This was it. "David, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady but laden with emotion. "And Emily needs to know she can't hide behind you anymore." David froze, his face paling as the words sank in. "What are you talking about?" Claire stepped forward, her eyes flashing with determination. "We know, Dad. We know about you and Emily. And it's time for you to face the truth." David's face turned a deep shade of red, his lips trembling as he opened his mouth to speak. but no words came out. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. Samantha crossed her arms, her gaze never leaving his. "No more lies, David. The truth is out, and now you're going to answer for it." As the reality of the situation set in, David finally managed to speak, his voice barely a whisper. "Samantha, I never meant for it to happen." But Samantha, with a coldness she hadn't known she was capable of, shook her head. "It doesn't matter what you meant. It only matters what you did." And in that moment, Samantha knew that the game had changed. She wasn't the woman who had stood by him, silently accepting his excuses. She wasn't the same person who had lived in denial. She had just crossed a line, and nothing would ever be the same again. David's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing in disbelief, as if the weight of the situation hadn't fully landed on him yet. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the heavy breathing that seemed to fill the space. Samantha's heart pounded in her chest, each beat a reminder of the pain that had been quietly festering inside her for months. She felt as though the room had grown smaller, like the walls were closing in on her. The man she had shared her life with, the one who had been her partner through every challenge, was standing in front of her, and she was seeing him for the first time, stripped of all the illusions she had built over the years. Claire, standing beside her mother, took in the scene with a mix of anger and sorrow. She had always looked up to David, admired the father figure he had been for her. But now, all she could see was a man who had betrayed their family in the most fundamental way, someone who had failed the people who loved him most. David finally found his voice, but it was barely above a whisper. "Sam, I'm sorry. I never meant for you to find out like this. I thought it was over. I thought it wouldn't matter." Samantha blinked, her chest tightening as if she had been punched. "Over? You thought it wouldn't matter?" Her voice rose, sharp and unyielding. "What exactly was over, David? The lies? The deceit? The affair with my sister?" David flinched at the words, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes flickered to the floor, as though he were trying to avoid facing the truth. It felt as if the entire weight of his betrayal hung in the air, suffocating the room. "You need to understand, Sam," he said, his voice shaky. "It wasn't about you. It wasn't about Emily. It was about, I don't know, something I wasn't getting, something I thought I was missing. I made a mistake." "Made a mistake?" Samantha's voice cracked with the force of her anger. She took a step closer to him, the distance between them shrinking with every word. "This wasn't a mistake. You didn't slip up or misstep, David. You made a conscious choice." Over and over again, David looked up at her, his eyes filled with guilt, but also a strange pleading. "I never wanted to hurt you, Sam. I'm so sorry. It was just a momentary thing. It didn't mean anything. It wasn't like what we had." Samantha felt her stomach twist as his words tumbled out, each one an insult to everything they had built. "A momentary thing?" she repeated, her voice low but fierce. "It wasn't a momentary thing when you were sneaking around with my sister. It wasn't a momentary thing when you've been lying to me for God knows how long. This was a choice, a deliberate betrayal." She could feel the tears welling up, but she fought them back. This wasn't the time to break down. She had to stay strong. She had to face this moment with the same resolve she had built her life on for all these years. But beneath the anger, beneath the icy resolve, the pain was sharp. It pierced through her chest, every word of David's excuses digging deeper into the wound that had opened inside her. Claire, standing silently beside her mother, could feel the anguish radiating off of Samantha. She had never seen her mother like this, never seen her so raw, so exposed. It was as if the very foundation of who she had been, who they all had been shattered in one devastating blow. "Do you even realize what you've done?" Claire finally spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've torn apart our family. You've hurt Mom in a way that no one should ever have to experience. And for what? Some fleeting, whatever you want to call it, is that really worth it?" David shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between the two women. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I know I messed up. I've been trying to fix it." "Fix it?" Samantha scoffed, the bitterness in her tone thickening. "You think you can fix this? There's nothing to fix, David. What you did is unforgivable." David opened his mouth, perhaps to plead again, but the words never came. There was a moment of uncomfortable silence before he spoke again, quieter this time, as if the enormity of his actions had finally started to settle in. I don't know what to say to make this better," he admitted, his voice hollow, defeated. Samantha shook her head slowly. "There's nothing you can say. There's nothing you can do to take this back." She turned to Claire, her eyes filled with both pain and determination. "I can't do this anymore, Claire. I can't keep pretending. He lied to me for months, and now I see the truth." Claire nodded, her eyes softening with empathy, but also with a firm resolve. She knew this wasn't going to be easy for her mother, but it was necessary. It was the only way to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. David looked between the two women, his face full of regret, but it was too late for apologies. Samantha had made up her mind. The silence between them grew heavier, suffocating. David took a tentative step forward, but Samantha held her ground, the weight of her decision settling over her like a heavy cloak. "No," she said firmly. "This is over, David. We're done." David's face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and desperation. He reached out a hand, as if to beg her to reconsider. But she stepped back, putting space between them. It was the last gesture she needed to make her point clear. Claire placed a hand on her mother's shoulder, offering her the silent support she needed. Samantha's eyes locked onto David's for one final moment. "This is the last time I'm going to explain this," Samantha said coldly. "I don't care what you have to say. You betrayed me. You betrayed our family, and now I'm walking away. I'm taking back what's mine. My dignity, my peace of mind. This ends now." As David stood frozen, unable to speak, Samantha turned to Claire, her voice softer now, but filled with quiet strength. "We're leaving, Claire. This is done." With one final look at the man she had loved for most of her life, Samantha walked toward the door, her steps measured and resolute. She had reclaimed her power. She had taken the first step toward healing, and no matter how painful the journey ahead might be, she knew it was the right one. The sound of the front door closing behind Samantha and Claire reverberated through the house, leaving David standing in the center of the living room, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. The weight of the situation, of his wife walking away, of the truth finally being out, was pressing down on him with an unbearable heaviness. He felt paralyzed, as if the ground had been pulled out from under him, leaving him suspended in the reality of his own choices. He had spent months, maybe even years, skating by on the thin surface of denial. The affair, the lies, the secrecy. He had convinced himself that it was all manageable, that it was just a passing phase, a need for excitement that would eventually fade. But now, standing in the wreckage of his own making, he realized how deeply wrong he had been. Samantha wasn't just hurt, she was devastated, and nothing he said now could undo the damage. David sank into the armchair, running a hand through his graying hair. His breath came out in short bursts as he processed the words that had just been spoken. "We're done." That was what Samantha had said. There was no going back from that. No turning the clock back. It was over. And it wasn't just Samantha who had been hurt. He had betrayed Emily, too. The shame and guilt washed over him. But even then, part of him wanted to justify his actions, to find a way to explain it all away, to tell himself that he wasn't as bad as it seemed. After all, he hadn't set out to destroy his marriage. He had been seeking something that he never found. And now, in the aftermath, all he could see was the wreckage of everything he had once held dear. He sat there in the silence of the empty house, hearing the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. It was like the entire world had gone quiet, and he was left with only the echo of his own thoughts. Then the phone rang. David's heart jumped in his chest as he reached for it, the screen flashing Emily's name. He hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to pick it up. But he couldn't ignore it. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. He swiped to answer, his voice shaky. "Emily?" he said, trying to sound calm, though his words came out ragged. "David," Emily's voice came through, quiet and cautious. "What happened? I haven't heard from you all day. I've been waiting for you to call." David felt a pang of guilt, sharp and cold. He wanted to scream at her, to demand that she take responsibility for what they had done, for what she had helped create. But instead, he stayed silent for a beat, collecting his thoughts. "It's over, Emily," he said finally, his voice hollow. "Sam knows everything. She found out about us." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and David could practically hear the shock in Emily's silence. "Wait. What? How did she find out?" Emily's voice quivered. David exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting to the empty space where Samantha had just stood. "I don't know. I don't know how she put it together, but she did. And she's gone. She's leaving me." Emily's response was a mix of disbelief and frustration. "David, you have to fix this. You can't just let her walk away. You've got to talk to her, tell her the truth, make her understand she can't just throw away everything we've built." David shook his head, his chest tight. "It's too late for that. Sam's made up her mind. She's done with me." Emily fell quiet for a moment. David could hear her breathing heavily, as though she too was coming to terms with the weight of the situation. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost pleading. "I didn't want this to happen, David. I never wanted to hurt anyone, but it's not like that. I love you." The words stung him, but not in the way he expected. There was no comfort in them, only a reminder of how deeply he had betrayed the trust of the woman he had married. It wasn't just that Emily had become involved with him. It was the entire web of lies, the secret meetings, the stolen moments. It wasn't just about the affair. It was the betrayal of the life they had built, of the people they had promised to protect. "You love me," he repeated, almost bitterly. "You've destroyed everything, Emily. You've destroyed my family, and now it's all falling apart." "I didn't mean to," Emily started, but David cut her off. "You didn't mean to? That's your excuse." His voice rose, full of frustration. "You think it's that simple? That just saying, 'I didn't mean to,' makes it okay?" Emily's voice dropped, barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, David. I never wanted to hurt you or Sam. I didn't know it would go this far." David let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow in the room. "It doesn't matter now, does it? It's over, she knows. I'm ruined." He didn't know what else to say to Emily. There was nothing left to say. The conversation had lost its meaning. The facade of understanding, of reconciliation, was gone. All that was left was the undeniable fact that he had failed. He had failed his wife, his family, and now Emily too. "I have to go," David said, his voice hoarse. "I'll figure out what to do." Before Emily could respond, He ended the call, his hand trembling as he placed the phone back on the table. He stared at it for a long time, as if expecting it to ring again, expecting some miraculous resolution to appear. But no call came. No answers were offered. David let out a heavy sigh, collapsing back into the chair. He had spent so much of his life believing that he could fix things, that he could balance everything: his marriage, his affair, his secrets. But now he realized that the lies he had told had built a foundation of sand beneath him, and it had all crumbled away. The following days felt like a blur. Samantha moved through them in a fog, her mind oscillating between numbness and a deep, gnawing ache. She hadn't expected it to be easy, but she had thought the initial confrontation would bring some clarity, some feeling of resolution. Instead, all she felt was a vast emptiness. David's absence in the house was palpable. It wasn't just his physical presence that was missing, but the emotional connection that had once tied them together. That connection had been severed with a cruel, invisible knife, and the wound had left a scar too deep to ignore. Samantha spent the first few days after the confrontation focused on simple tasks. She needed the mundane routines of life to anchor her. She cooked dinner for Claire and her husband Eric, even though she barely tasted the food. She cleaned the house, folding towels and wiping down surfaces, her movements mechanical. But when the silence of the house became unbearable, her thoughts always returned to the decision that loomed before her. The truth was there, clear and unavoidable. Samantha knew she had to act. She couldn't let the betrayal fester, couldn't keep pretending that things could somehow be fixed. No amount of apologies, no grand gestures from David would undo the damage. She had seen a lawyer once, many years ago, just to draw up a will and handle some basic financial matters. But this was different. This wasn't about legal documents and routine matters. This was about her life, her future, and her dignity. Claire had encouraged her to take the next step. "Mom, you deserve better than this," she had said, her voice full of conviction. "I know it's hard, but you can't stay in this. You don't owe him anything anymore." Samantha had hesitated at first. Her heart ached at the thought of the life she had built with David. Those years, those moments that seemed too precious to just throw away. But she knew, deep down, that this was not a life she wanted to continue living. That afternoon, she called the lawyer's office. It wasn't easy to do. It wasn't the kind of decision she ever thought she would make. But as the phone rang and the receptionist answered, she felt a small, quiet relief. It was time. The lawyer, a woman named Sarah, was kind but professional. She took Samantha's information and arranged a meeting for the following week. During their brief conversation, Samantha's thoughts remained clear. This was no longer about salvaging a relationship. It was about reclaiming her peace of mind, her life. She had spent too long hiding behind the walls of denial, and she was done. The decision was not an act of impulsive anger, but of quiet determination. Samantha was not just ending a marriage. She was reclaiming herself, her dignity, and her future. The night before her appointment with the lawyer, Samantha sat in the living room, staring out of the window at the dimming sky. The streetlights flickered on, casting a soft glow on the pavement. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the clock on the wall. It was almost as though time itself had slowed, holding its breath, waiting for her to make the final move. David hadn't come home that evening. He hadn't come home the night before either. Samantha had expected as much. He was hiding, avoiding her, unable to face the mess they had created. But the absence didn't make her feel anything anymore, just the familiar emptiness that had settled inside her. She didn't feel anger anymore, not the sharp, immediate kind she had felt when she first found out. What she felt now was resignation. The pain of the betrayal had settled into a dull ache, And with that, her resolve had hardened. There was no more room for second chances. No more room for the man who had chosen betrayal over honesty. It was time for closure. The decision had been made. Tomorrow, she would file for divorce. She would sit down with the lawyer and take the first steps toward creating a new life. One where she could heal. One where she could reclaim the pieces of herself that had been lost over the years. But before she could do that, she needed to confront David one last time. This wasn't for him. It was for her. She needed him to understand, to truly understand the depth of his actions, and for him to face the consequences of what he had done. Samantha stood up and walked into the kitchen, her movements slow and deliberate. She pulled out a glass of wine and sipped it, her eyes fixed on the darkening sky outside. She could hear the rustle of the leaves outside, the only sound that seemed to make sense in this chaotic moment. Her phone buzzed. It was David. She hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the screen. She had already made up her mind. But she needed to hear him. She needed to hear him try to explain away the irreparable damage he had done. She answered the call. His voice, once comforting, now sounded distant, unfamiliar. "Samantha, I've been thinking a lot about everything. I know I messed up and I don't know how to make it right." His words were softer now, tinged with the desperation he hadn't shown before. "Please, just give me a chance to explain. I'm not asking for forgiveness right away, but I need you to hear me out." Samantha took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been waiting for. But she wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. She wasn't waiting for any explanation. "I don't need your explanation, David," she said, her voice steady, cold. "I've heard it all before. I don't need your apologies, your guilt, or your promises. What I need now is for you to understand that I am done. I'm done with the lies. I'm done with the betrayal. I'm done with you." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Samantha could hear him breathing, the quiet desperation that filled the space between them. She could almost see the look of shock on his face, and she didn't care. "Tomorrow, I'm seeing a lawyer," she continued, her voice unwavering. "And I'm filing for divorce. This is the end, David. I can't keep living like this." There was no response, only the sound of David's breath on the other end. Samantha didn't need to hear anything more. She had already said what needed to be said. "I'll be moving out," she added, her voice steady as she set down her glass. "And when I do, I'm taking everything with me. It's over." Samantha hung up the phone without waiting for a reply. She had said what needed to be said. She had drawn the line. And for the first time in days, Samantha felt something other than pain. She felt a small spark of hope. Tomorrow, she would begin her life again. The life that had been stolen from her in an instant, but one that she was finally taking back. The divorce papers were signed. The proceedings had moved forward with a quiet inevitability, each step more liberating than the last. Samantha sat in her lawyer's office, her fingers tapping gently on the polished wooden desk as Sarah went over the details one last time. It wasn't as dramatic as the movies made it out to be. There were no tears, no wild confrontations. Just a final official end to the life she had once known. "Everything looks in order," Sarah said, placing the final draft of the documents on the table. "I'll submit these to the court, and you should receive your hearing date soon. But from what we've discussed, I don't foresee any major issues." Samantha nodded, her thoughts elsewhere. She wasn't thinking about the legalities of the divorce or the settlement. She wasn't concerned with what would happen to the house or the finances. Those things would sort themselves out. What mattered now was the future that was beginning to take shape, one that didn't include the constant weight of betrayal. She had reclaimed control of her life, and now she was ready to rebuild. The first few weeks after filing were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and paperwork again. Samantha was focused, determined. She spent time sorting through her belongings, taking inventory of what she wanted to keep and what she needed to let go of. Each box she packed felt like a symbolic gesture, a way of putting the past behind her, one item at a time. David had tried to contact her a few times, but she ignored his calls. His apologies, his promises, none of it mattered now. He had made his choices, and now it was time for her to make hers. She had already grieved for the person she thought he was. Now, she was grieving for the life she had lost, but more importantly, she was learning to embrace the life she was choosing to create. The divorce was final. The papers had been signed, the legal battles fought, and the house, her home, was now hers to keep. Samantha sat in the same living room where so many memories had once played out, where laughter and love had filled the air, and where, just months ago, the world had come crashing down around her. Now, the room felt different. It felt quieter, but not in a sad way. It felt like a space that was hers again, a place where she could breathe freely. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was Claire, as usual, checking in. Samantha smiled as she answered, her heart lightening with the familiar warmth of her daughter's voice. "Hey, Mom. How are you today?" Samantha paused for a moment, her eyes glancing around the room, and then she answered, her voice steady and full of a quiet confidence. "I'm good, Claire. I'm really good." The call ended, and Samantha set the phone down, her eyes lingering on the empty space in front of her. For the first time in months, she felt at peace. The future wasn't as clear as she might have hoped, but it was hers. Her life was hers to live, her choices hers to make.